All right, this is a slightly different presentation, and as Howard indicated, we really are basing this on the controversies column that he wrote back in 2000 in Visions, where he noted the lack of attention to the need for emancipation or liberation of human beings from oppressive social systems and the patriarchal, racist, and authoritarian environments that suppress human caring values, and the lack of attention to this that people have commented on within the science of unitary human beings. He did, however, acknowledge that Rogers had always emphasized concerns about social issues across her writings, especially in her first 3 books. And he offered Barrett's theory of power as knowing participation in change as a way to reconceptualize critical social theory, bringing it into closer alignment with the science. Now, again, this was back in 2000. And to our knowledge, no one picked up on this line of thinking until the Rogerian Conference in October of 2021, when Jane Hopkins Walsh and Anne-Marie Leveille Tulce presented Science of Unitary Human Beings towards an anti-racist framework for human environment well-becoming, offering again Barrett's power theory as a way to address such concerns, one way among others. This panel today continues in that vein with the hope of spurring dialogue in the science addressing racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, and ongoing threats to the environment and to plant and animal life to facilitate well-becoming for all living beings and the environment. Despite outdated theoretical concepts and language, it's important to revisit Rogers' 3 books as our starting point. 1961's Educational Revolution in Nursing. She wrote, uncompromising concern for human welfare is the central unifying force for nursing in the road ahead. And nursing will fulfill its obligation to society to the extent to which it brings conscious, knowledgeable intervention to bear upon the welfare of humankind. 1964's Reveille in Nursing. She identified the importance of social responsibility and ethical decision-making to preserve human worth and dignity for all, insisting that nurses are concerned with all people, wherever they might be, promoting human health and welfare through provision of knowledgeable nursing services. Nurses have the capacity for envisioning the future and determining sound direction in the great task of building a healthy society. 1970s, an introduction to the theoretical basis of nursing. The first detailed introduction to the science, so sadly out of date now that students and others are routinely told not to read it. What is missed, however, if they are not also told that once they have a firm grounding in the science from the 1992 article, it is well worth reading the 1970 book for things like a fuller appreciation of her grasp of the numerous fields that contributed to her early thinking and her passion for fulfilling the social ends for which nursing exists. She wrote that if we are to talk about maintaining and promoting health, we must also talk about preventing and correcting health problems. Now, this is a long quote, including those stemming from social inequities, technological advances, poor and inadequate housing, ghetto areas, racial and occupational discrimination, economic and educational deprivation, criminal acts, suicide rates, drug addiction, property destruction, mental retardation, and poor and inadequate delivery of health services. Ecological imbalances growing out of the use of pesticides, detergents, and water and air pollutants, the population explosion, artificial organ transplants, rising radiation levels, and genetic discoveries further complicate the picture. She pointed out that no one is exempt from these issues, so nursing practice must be flexible and creative, individualized, socially oriented, compassionate, and skillful. And it is nursing's conceptual system that provides the foundation for this nursing practice. Embracing diversity has always been a hallmark of Rogerian nursing science. Problems occur, however, when people begin to value one manifestation of diversity over another and act accordingly, rather than embracing all. We all need to be aware of oppressive patterning manifestations and participate knowingly to deal with them in such a way as to promote well-becoming for all. Rogers later dropped language about prevention, health promotion, etc., maintaining instead that although people cannot start, stop, or manipulate the ongoing change process, we can participate knowingly in it. However, we do not always do so wisely. Elizabeth Barrett used this basic assumption in developing her theory of power as knowing participation in change. Power is the capacity to participate knowingly in change by being aware, making choices, feeling free to act intentionally, and being involved in creating change. Barrett experienced an aha in which she realized that there are two different forms of power that coexist and are antithetical to one another. She, excuse me, she differentiated them as the spiritual, a causal of power, power as freedom, representative of the science and her theory, and the causal mechanistic view of power, power as control, two very different worldviews. Accepting that these two views of power exist mandates that those living power as freedom embrace diversity and engage in social activism, being ever alert to the various forms of oppression that exist and acting to combat them. This demands a critical perspective on one's human environmental patterning. I will participate knowingly and see what changes, always with the intent of facilitating power as freedom for all living beings. Power as freedom is to be embraced, and power as control is to be refuted. So this means we need to critically examine things like Barrett's question, one of the four designed to guide yourself in actions that suggest powerful participation in the situation. Do the changes I intend to create interfere with anyone else's freedom? If the change desired is alleviation of harmful or oppressive actions towards another living being or the environment, that does involve interfering with the perpetrator's perception of freedom to engage in such action. And Barrett certainly was concerned about manifestations of power as control, such as oppression, racism, and war. I believe people everywhere have power. They can knowingly participate in change, even where conditions limit or constrain that freedom. I have never forgotten, as a college student back in the late 1960s, reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist who developed logotherapy, who wrote, "When a man finds it is his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept his suffering as a single and unique task. His unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden. You are free to choose with intention how you will be, even in a concentration camp." Similarly, in Freedom in Jail, Roberto Assagioli, Italian psychiatrist and founder of Psychosynthesis, who was jailed under the fascist regime in 1940, wrote, "I realized that I was free to take one or another attitude towards the situation, to give one or another value to it, to utilize it or not in one or another way. I was free to choose any or several of these attitudes and activities. There was no doubt in my mind about this essential freedom and power and their inherent privileges and responsibilities. Virginia Allen, now 91, was living her power when she arrived in 1947 at Seaview Hospital in Staten Island, New York, which treated patients with TB. She wanted to learn to become a nurse. This was at a time when TB was killing 1 out of 7 people, and most white nurses at the facility refused to care for these patients in what was termed the pest house. Black nurses were recruited from the South and came for the opportunity to work in a non-segregated setting. Despite those patients who did not want a Black nurse, this group, including Ms. Allen, persevered and were dubbed the Black Angels by those for whom they cared. Although she did not use the language of the power theory, she was clearly talking about women living their power when Hillary Clinton said, "I have met new mothers in Indonesia who come together regularly in their village to discuss nutrition, family planning, and baby care. I have met women in South Africa who helped lead the struggle to end apartheid and are now helping to build a new democracy. I have met women in India and Bangladesh who are taking out small loans to buy milk cows or rickshaws or thread in order to create a livelihood for themselves and their families. Nurse and New York Assemblywoman, daughter of Haitian immigrants, Farah Souffrant Forrest, was living her power when, while working in OBGYN at Kings County Hospital Center in Brooklyn, New York, she fought to improve care for women, saying, "When you address the needs of women, you can see it's actually childcare, it's education, it's the workforce, it's environmental justice. So you're shaping the future when you focus on women's health." Roya Mahoob, the first woman CEO of an Afghan tech company, lives her power despite the oppressive control over women and girls exerted by the Taliban. On restoring their freedom, she said, "It's going to take time. It's challenging, but worth it." She is hopeful for change in the future, as this generation is different and will persevere, many now being educated in underground classrooms. They are aware, I am sure, of the dangers in living one's freedom in a society characterized by power as control. But I'm also sure they are being mutually supported by Barrett's health patterning modality of love, power, resonance that they share among themselves. Chase Iron Eyes of the Lakota People's Law Project was living his freedom when he addressed the UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights Working Group on Indigenous Rights and Self-Determination to declare the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples on a global scale and emphasize the United States' illegal seizure of and ongoing occupation of the Black Hills, against which the Lakota People's Law Project continues to fight. Baratunde Thurston hosts America Outdoors on PBS, visiting states across the country, highlighting natural wonders and people's mutual process with their environment. In one episode, he visited Elaine, Arkansas, the site of one of the country's worst race massacres back in 1919 that very few people today know about. The mayor, a Black woman, spoke of the murders of hundreds of Black people by white people after a group of sharecroppers simply asked for a living wage and the right to buy property. Thurston used 3 words that I put together as trauma evolving into resilience, evolving into possibilities, and living power as freedom is living possibilities. As the four dimensions are interrelated and interdependent, evolving awareness means evolving choices, means evolving freedom, and engaging in actions to knowingly participate in change. Awareness. There is a reason that banning books is one of the first tools of the oppressors. Other members of this panel will lead us into deeper exploration, starting with Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Violet. Violet just shared different ways that people from different parts of the world live and experience their power. I will discuss the use of Barrett's theory to frame a research study that sought to examine the power of an underserved and underprivileged group in Haiti, a country most often crowned the most impoverished country in the Western Hemisphere, and where people struggle every day to live their power as freedom while navigating the maze of power as control. The study was inspired by next slide. The study was inspired by my participation in health missions in Haiti with the Gascov Clergy Foundation, where I encountered many caregivers with little and sometimes hardly any financial means to buy medication, but they were determined to find a solution to the ailments of their children. One of the conditions that I was most struck by was childhood vaginitis. Children and adolescents were affected, and parents were complaining about recurrences and difficulties to treat the condition. In addition, an unpublished qualitative study that I conducted revealed the importance of parents' engagement in preventing and treating vaginitis in their children. The aim of the study was to examine the power of primary Haitian caregivers before and after their participation in a health patterning modality that consisted of education and selection of resources. Why choosing power as during participation in change theory to frame a study which would take place in a geographical area and with a population that was far different from maybe the population that the theory was developed to be used with. First, I strongly agree with the theory's assumption that everybody has power, but at times they may experience feeling of powerlessness. Second, I resent the patriarchal idea that one can empower another. Although empowerment was conceptualized and redefined as a health patterning of well-being in which the client optimizes the ability to transform self through the relational process of nursing by, shear, and with, it does not replace power. Barrett views empowerment as a manifestation of power, not as power itself. In addition, in Haiti, health modalities and research enshrined in power as control have proven to be ineffective and to perpetuate inequities. My determination to use the tool and the theory was based on the premises that power is an innate characteristic and that power as control constrains and power as freedom liberates. The study population consisted of 80 Haitian primary caregivers of school-age children that were from a disadvantaged and underserved population, most of whom did not have the level of education required to use the tool. The tool was backblind translated in Haitian Creole and piloted before use in the study. The tool was previously used on population with less than the required level of education and was translated in several other languages with good Conbash alpha reliability. Participants' power profile was measured before and after the participation in a health patterning modality that considered the population needs. Health patterning modalities, according to Barrett, are power boosters, and they have been shown to significantly increase power. The health modality that I developed was different from what I encountered in the literature, which was mostly yoga, therapeutic touch, meditation, and so forth. It was consisted of education about risk factors, prevention, and treatment of childhood vaginitis, resources such as cotton panties, towels, soap, and distribution of educational leaflets. A poster was also used to facilitate visualization of concepts. According to Butcher, health patterning modalities should go beyond basic factors and address all issues that can hinder people's participation in working toward well-becoming. This health patterning modality address the population inequity.
Hey, Mommy's going out. You stay in your house. I'll see you later, inshallah. Hi, Rafael. Good girl.
So I can. All right, thank you. Yes, according to Butcher, health pattern modality should go beyond basic factors and address all issues that can hinder people's participation in working toward well-becoming. This health patterning modality address the population inequities to access of resources and health education related to childhood vaginitis. The study encompassed Barrett's two phases practice methodology, pattern manifestation, knowing and appreciation, and voluntary mutual patterning. During the two phases, the researcher and participant mutually patterned, inquired, shared, acknowledged, and appreciated pattern manifestation of power evolving from the encounter. Participants were able to count the actions they took on their own to deal with their girls' problems and how the information discussed will enable them to better handle their situation. The study findings revealed that participants have high power profile before and after participation in the health modality. In addition, participants' power significantly increased after their participation in the health patterning modality. High power profile before participation in the health modality was also supported by participants' account of engagement in actions to treat their children's symptoms. For example, they reported taking their children to the doctor and using what they had at their disposal and knew could help them, such as herbal medicines. These findings support the innate nature of power and the assumption that health patterning modalities that facilitate mutual patterning can enhance power as knowing participation in change. They also support the notion that regardless of origin, ethnic and racial identities, abilities, circumstances, and geographical location, people have the ability to participate in change for the well-becoming. Next slide. Yet, the questions remain. Was there more that could and should be done to make this theory more fitted to the notion that power is an innate characteristic and exists in everybody wherever they are? In the context of my study, the tool was translated in Haitian Creole. The translation process was rigorous and followed a 4-step back-blind translation. Moreover, the tool was piloted before use and has high Cron-Bash alpha reliability, both in the pilot study and the research study. Nevertheless, during the tool translation process, one of the translators, who is a renowned Haitian scholar and versed in the Haitian culture, proposed a creative cultural adaptation of the tool. He called it, in Haitian Creole, Liberté pour éclairer et transformer, which translates freedom to know and change. which he equated to power as during participation. The same ideas and thinkings were used, but words that were more familiar to the population were used in certain cases. His position was that a cultural adaptation would use languages that better resonate with the population and ease their ability to use the tool and identify their power. Dr. Barrett disproved the idea of a cultural adaptation and only gave me permission for the simple translation. Another issue that arises with the use of the tool was the required level of education and its feasibility for the research population. Yet, I made an intentional and purposeful choice to use the theory and the tool based on their potential to debunk beliefs that certain groups cannot do for themselves or don't have the ability to engage in change for well-becoming and must be rescued or saved. While in reality, all they need is an appreciation of their lived experience, acknowledgement that they are capable of participating in action to better their lived experience, and their assistance to do so. This shows the need for nurses to objectively critique and analyze the theory for compatibility and relevancy to the global population, and for Wagerian scholars to devise new language that is more comprehensible and encompassing. One way they can do that is by reconceptualizing and reformulate words deemed incompatible with the theory. Shearer and Reed, 2004, with empowerment, and Butcher, 2000, with critical theory, have paved the way for nurses to do just that. And we have heard yesterday from Martha and forget. And Jackie, you know, how Rogers, reformulate some of the, change some of the concept that she used in the theory. Although I admit that reformulating and reconceptualizing has to be done with caution and within the tenets of the worldview. In addition, Wagerian scholars, and especially those using Barrett as knowing participation in change tools, should fully embrace the diversity and complexity of the open and pan-dimensional energy fields of human and environment, and let it flow in new ways of knowing, thinking, and practicing. The question is how we nurses address and navigate the very challenges and roadblocks of power as control to mutually engage with clients in their quest for well-becoming and become catalysts of power as freedom. This can be done by encouraging nurses from minority groups to build on the science of unitary human beings and Barrett's work, add their own perspective to the theory, and make it more representative of the population they serve. This requires nursing engagement in research and practice modalities that are representative of today's complex, more than open and diverse world, and that address its intricate and multifaceted needs. Butcher suggests to go beyond and look at the social and structural barriers that Black people's journey to well-becoming. Nurses and other healthcare professionals need to continually be aware of the strong presence of power as control around them and in them, and engage in modalities that will disrupt its impact on the flow of power as freedom, helps enshrine in power as control, do more harm than good, and do not contribute to fully engage in change for well-becoming. Now, I will hand it over to Mary, who will continue the conversation.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Barrett, in her 2010 paper, defines power as the capacity to participate knowingly in change. She further states that people are always participating in change, but only when change is done knowingly is it power. In this presentation, I would like to share with you some possible explanation of why some African Americans may choose to not use conventional medical system, and in the context of power as control. And then I would like to share 3 stories from participants in my dissertation study that I think can be considered examples of power as freedom. Second slide. From the point of view of power and freedom, there is no question that African Americans have been culturally traumatized by slavery and its consequences. Joy DeGruy wrote about post-traumatic slave syndrome as one of the consequences of slavery. She states that post-traumatic slave syndrome is a condition that exists when a population experiences multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. Added to this condition is the belief, real or imagined, that the benefits of the society in which they live are not accessible to them. The 3 main patterns of behavior of this syndrome are vacant esteem, which is described as having feelings of hopelessness, depression, and general self-destructive outlook. Vacant esteem is a state of believing in oneself as having little or no value, worsened by claims of inferiority from their personal realm and the larger society. The next pattern is ever-present anger. And in ever-present anger, anger is seldom far away. It is as if there is a wellspring of anger that lies underneath the surface in African Americans, and in particularly men. Individuals may feel extreme feelings of suspicion and perceive negative motivation of others. And thirdly, racist socialization. This involves taking on the value system, the views and attitudes of the enslaver. The foundation of this value system is the belief that whites and all things white associated with whiteness are better than Black, and all things associated with Blackness is considered mediocre. Since the exploitation and mistreatment of the Tuskegee syphilis study, the government has been more rigid in implementing laws to protect human research participants. However, even with this increased protection, third slide, African Americans are still fearful and cautious of being harmed by the medical establishment. During the Civil War period, Black people, both free and enslaved, were used for experimentation. And even though poor whites were used, Black people were used more. Present-day fear and mistrust among Black Americans towards medicine and healthcare systems stem from the reality that white medical educators and researchers depend heavily on the availability and use of African American patients for experiments, including dissection, surgery, and bedside demonstration. The end of slavery did not give equal treatment. The end of slavery was only an illusion of freedom, as states quickly enforced laws to continue the subjugation of African Americans. Although it is not known to what extent African Americans continued to be used as unwilling subjects in experimentation and dissection in the years following the end of slavery, African Americans believe that these practices persist. Stories abound with references to night doctors, student doctors, and Ku Klux Klan doctors. And as these PowerPoint depicts, this is as recent as October 16th, when the Museum of Natural History is coming under fire for their 12,000 human remains. And some of these remains, it is estimated, were dug up in the 1940s. In one instance, a physician described the torments associated with some of the experiments. For example, the same physician stated that one of his patients, a Black person, required repair of a bladder defect, which initially was done unsuccessfully. He described not using any anesthesia or any type of sedation as he performed the procedure. Only after the procedure was perfected was it used on whites with the use of anesthesia. Fear of exploitation by white physicians has permeated the Black culture everywhere Africans were enslaved. Now, in the 21st century, African Americans continue to distrust the healthcare system. They distrust that their white physician would not fully explain their health condition or make light of their situation as they would to their white counterparts, regardless to their social class. African Americans have experienced something that no other culture or race have, and that is the unique combination of racism, slavery, and segregation. It has caused African Americans to develop not only different behavioral patterns, values, and beliefs because of fear, but also different value systems and perspective. Distrust of healthcare systems by African Americans run deep, from feelings of fear or ill gains, and from participation in clinical trials to being used only as guinea pigs. The theoretical perspective, from a theoretical perspective, we see Barrett's theory of power. That is, power as control throughout this narrative. Individuals were being used, maltreated, and manipulated. Barrett's theory proposed that a person is aware that of what he or she chooses to do, that they feel free to do it and does it intentionally. According to Barrett, even though people are always participating in change, participation is not always done knowingly. It is only when participation is done knowingly can it be called power. However, the story does not end there. In my study with Afro-Caribbean people, the lived experience of folklore as a health patterning modality, participants talked about their freedom to use folk remedies to heal themselves. For example, one participant, Godfrey, states, "I'm 51 years old this year, and I don't take medication. I have no headaches, no pain, no aches." He further states, "I've been working for 25 years, and I have never called in sick. I have not taken Tylenol or aspirin for 20 years. He further states that everything he uses is 100% natural, meaning it's naturally grown. Godfrey spoke about visiting his medical doctor yearly, but doing a regular cleanse was important based on how he treats his body. He says, you got to be your first doctor. April, another participant, states, growing up in the Caribbean, it's just what I know. It's our culture. It's been handed down for over generations and it works. Healthcare is not easily accessible to people, especially if you're poor. Also, people tend to have a huge mistrust of doctors. For me, in my life, my mom and my dad use it. You know, my family members. I see it actually works, she says. I feel empowered, like I can do something to help myself as opposed to leaving my health in the hands of someone else. And lastly, Zoom talked about, she says, I was raised in an environment of folk practices. Whether it be healing approaches or mental approaches or just rituals. I think both of my parents were of the same mindset, that you only go to doctors when it's extremely important. My mother was advised by doctors that she should have a pacemaker. She said, I would rather make the decision to move on. She had 8 children at home and never went to the hospital. This participant, Bazom, had success in treating her fibroids when she was told she needed surgery to remove them because of the discomfort and heavy bleeding that she was experiencing. Each of these participants were passionate about their beliefs and their health practices. Their strong conviction against the medical practitioner was tainted with caution and fear. But without question, they were aware of their choices. They felt free to act intentionally and were able to make changes they wanted to make. The themes that emerge from these participants were believing in nature's resources reveal wholeness and healing. Maintaining life means balancing the daily complexities of living with the unity of God and nature in mutual process. And generational healing is living legacy. These themes suggest that individuals circling through life amidst the various complexities in mutual process with the environment. In this context, Barrett's idea is profound when she suggests that people can knowingly participate in creating their reality by actualizing some of their potential rather than others. They knowingly participate in creating what manifests as their experience by being aware, making choices, and feeling free to act on their intentions and involving themselves in creating changes. And I will pass it on now to Jane.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Anne Marie and Violet. I will open with a poem that arose from compiling a small sample of powerful quotes from my qualitative research in unitary appreciation for the words of the participants as patterning and wholeness. In my qualitative research, mentored by Rogerian scholars Dr. Flanagan and Dr. Jones, I used Margaret Newman's Health as Expanding Consciousness research praxis, which I will now refer to as HEC, as well as assumptions from Rogers' Science of Unitary Human Beings. The science and the theory explored life experiences, patterning, and meaning by receiving stories in Spanish, their preferred language, for a sample of 13 immigrant and asylum-seeking emerging adults, ages 18 to 22 from Guatemala and Honduras. Through 2 interviews per person, each participant responded to the central HEC research question, please tell me about an important person or event in your life. Here is the poem in Spanish, and the English version I will read aloud today, but much of the beauty of the words are lost in the translation. I got $1,000, and with that, I started adrift. I looked out the window and everything was gray. Everything was gray. I've been healing my wounds because I'm surrounded by love, family, friends. We are far from the family, but here we are better. We are bad, but we are good. Thank God we have food, but sometimes we don't get hungry. I have not felt time because one spends it working here. And when you feel it's over, what? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and well, I say, how fast? I grapple with the theoretical concepts of freedom and power in my dissertation and ongoing research. To reconcile that, my dissertation theories were intentionally and explicitly contextualized within both nursing and non-nursing ideas, with assumptions from critical race theory, critical posthumanism, and feminist new materialism. This approach allowed me to critically think through analyses of power and freedom that arose within HEC and SUHB. The multiplicity of theories wove together alongside unitary transformative assumptions arising from SUHB. This approach aligned with anti-racism, anti-oppression, and anti-colonial ways of being with human and non-human caring, accompaniment, and research. In her 2008 book, Newman defined freedom as a possibility in the journey of increasing consciousness and human becoming. I connected Newman's definition to the idea of the rhizome from French post-structuralist philosophers Deleuze and Guattari, where rhizomes, like bamboo, for example, become a tangled web of ideas, non-binary, non-linear, with possibilities that open up what Deleuze and Guattari describe as new lines of flight. I reimagined knowledge in the form of a rhizomatic drawing of the theories flowing within a unitary transformative time space. This hand-drawn picture, titled Rhizomatic Representation of Theories, shows the flowing, nonlinear, interconnected ontologies that informed my research. Rhizomatic approaches transcend dichotomies of knowing and nursing and are integral. I was further informed by a critical qualitative arts-based approach of Kelly Clark Keefe, who blends the cognitive acts of telling and receiving story with the somatic states of the researcher and the participants. Clark Keefe's approach aligns with Newman's holographic resonancy. To quote Clark Keefe, theories are alive in the bodies of the participant and the researcher. This view of theory, as Dottie Jones discussed yesterday, theory, praxis, research, no commas, no hyphens, is integral. Reflecting upon the science and theories that grounded my project reveals that the assumptions are compatible and congruent. Karen Barad's new materialist theorizing, called rippling and diffraction, flowed harmoniously with Rogers and Newman's concepts of integrality and resonancy. Barad, Rogers, and Newman's ideas all draw upon quantum physics and energy science in explaining human and non-human matter in mutual processes and relation, as well as knowing through art, movement, music, and the body. Barad's work is explicitly grounded in feminist new materialism, which allows for more critical analyses of the situated material experiences of power and gender. Martha Rogers taught us to read widely and reach across disciplines. Rogers' examples of rhizomatic thinking highlights the path for anti-racism work in nursing theory and praxis. In this complex world, nurses must draw upon all ways of knowing, emphasizing critical theories, Black, Latina, Latino, Latinx, and Indigenous feminist theories, queer theory, crip theory, resonancy with nature and non-nature, and non-human creatures, encompassing political and emancipatory knowing and drawing upon the arts, sciences, humanities, nature, animals, plants, all matter. Like Rogers, Newman in 2003 imagined a theoretical world of no boundaries for nursing. Newman used the words an interconnected web across all theories and all ways of knowing, connecting art, science, research, practice. Well over 50 years ago, nursing education established itself in the academy. In the movement to professionalize nursing as a legitimate science and a scientific profession in the US, knowledge boundaries were often imposed, rejecting non-nursing knowledge. Today, gratefully, we stand on the shoulders of the nurse theorists who came before us, while simultaneously acknowledging the nursing academy actively excluded nurses of color. It was not a welcome space open to all nurses. Inequitable structures that continue in the pan-dimensional present. Leadership in nursing still remains largely white, cisgender, heterosexual, middle, and upper class. Non-nursing knowledge and theory, liberation theory and critical race theory, for example, is often discouraged in nursing academy and sometimes referred to as borrowed theory. Studying racism in nursing is discouraged and policed as inflammatory, and it's being criminally outlawed in classrooms across the nation. Restrictive approaches to knowledge development in nursing is especially prominent in nursing theory movements emanating from the USA, as Olga Petrovskaya and others like Mark Rajord have written about. Nursing scholars in the EU, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have been writing with and across theories, including critical race theory, for decades, while reckoning with their histories of colonialism. Connecting widely across and between disciplines for nursing knowledge development and including multiple ways of knowing is an example of voyaging across the pan-dimensional universe. Some reflections on evolving concepts in HEC. It's important to bring attention to the Eurocentric Western biases in SUHB and HEC theory. Ontological appropriation refers to Western Eurocentric practices of appropriating wisdom and knowledge from non-Western cultures without credit, a practice that has roots in colonialism. In my dissertation, I examined the lack of historical situatedness of HEC and discuss ideas of cultural appropriation around the non-Western philosophical concepts found in both HEC and SUHB. The idea that SUHB was greatly influenced by non-Western philosophies was explored by Rogerian nurse scholar Barbara Sartor in 1988. Sartre called for in-depth analysis of Eastern or other non-Western philosophies that were informing many of the nursing theories that were being developed in university-based programs at the height of the nurse theory movement. Similarly, Hanchett, in an article titled Concepts from Eastern Philosophy and Rogers' Science of Unitary Human Beings, published in 1992 Nursing Science Quarterly, explicated ways that SUHB shared many similarities of thought with Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. Crediting, attributing, and citing original cultural sources, including scholars of color, are important actions to carry forward in nursing to avoid perpetuating epistemicide as an ongoing colonizing force in nursing knowledge development. To quote Indigenous scholar Eve Tuck and colleague Wayne Yang, begin quote, "Said another way, the academy as an apparatus of settler colonial knowledge already domesticates, denies, and dominates other forms of knowledge." Young's spectrum of evolution of consciousness is foundational in Newman's work. Young's V-shaped conceptualization discussed the process of human becoming with degrees of freedom that together formed a movement toward greater freedom as a geometry of meaning. However, in light of current environmental, social, and political oppressions facing emerging adult immigrants from Northern Central America, ideas from anti-racism theory were applied. This included reflections on historical and present-day structural oppressions of immigrant people from Northern Central America, acknowledgement of my own positionality and complicity within historical and present-day colonial realities, and attention to issues of power, cultural, and identity. It was important to, in my research project, make explicit that HEC was developed within a global Northern Western Eurocentric context where individualism is valued over collectivism, and some HEC assumptions are not culturally congruent within the context of culture and meaning where collectivism is valued over individualism. In addition, the concept of freedom was critically reconciled in light of the structural barriers that many emerging adult immigrants with precarious legal status experience within situations of poverty, discrimination, racism, and literal lack of freedom of bodily movements within many spaces in society and the community, an immigration concept referred to as discredited social position. It's important to make explicit the intersectional and structural issues of power, including gender, race, class, sexuality, and immigration status, and understand how it influences Newman's concept of freedom as experienced by emerging adult immigrants who often have restrictions of space and time due to precarious legal status. In closing, I will present 4 anti-racism actions to consider moving forward. It's important to situate all theorizing in politics, history, and society. Failure to acknowledge historical facts, especially those related to ongoing colonialism and oppression, creates a politics of ignorance in nursing, an erasure that is in itself structurally related to forms of political non-knowing, as described by nurse scholars Perrone and Rudge in 2015. Non-knowing is a privilege associated with whiteness. Number 2, linked to multiple ways of thinking. Critical posthumanism adds ideas and assumptions from critical race theory and critical feminist perspectives. Critical posthumanism examines racialized and intersectional experiences of people and community, highlighting histories and power inequities, capitalism in the ongoing colonization of the planetary system, and within the dominant culture, the colonizers, assemblages of power and truth, including those found and replicated within structures of academia, research, and science. Number 3, connects to non-Eurocentric power analyses and conceptualizations of power. They are abundant, developed through centuries of writing by Black and Indigenous and other authors of scholars and authors of color. Doctors, activists, artists like Fanon, Mbembe, Glissant, Cesari, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Sylvia Wynter, James Baldwin, Saidiya Hartman, for example. Critical Eurocentric analyses of power include Foucault and Deleuze and Guattari. Nurses' devotion to maintaining boundaries around discipline-specific knowledge is a barrier to anti-racist theorizing. We must collectively and individually identify and act upon the patterns of power as control that we nurses continue to participate in and perpetuate. Number 4, critical nurse theorizing. SUHB and HEC emanated from the USA, and they are integral with our nation's history of whiteness and racism and exclusion in nursing. Many of the concepts include assumptions from humanism that center white Eurocentric man, including emphasis on freedom, power, agency, individualism, choice, and consciousness. Olga Petrovskaya critiques what she refers to as American nurse theory, like SUB and HEC, as largely lacking important critical analyses found within postmodern and post-structural perspectives, which specifically center analyses of power and intersectional oppression. To date, critical theorizing in US-based nursing theory is largely underdeveloped, and this is an urgent path to further explore and develop moving forward. As Rogerians, let's reconnect to Howard Butcher's call, turn of the century call, 2000, for critical race theory, and align with Dottie Jones' call yesterday for a dramatic shift to propel the anti-racism project across the pan-dimensional universe, making critical theory and Rogerian science no longer incommensurable, instead reconcilable as just and equitable actions for well-becoming. Thank you for listening. Next, Violet will say a few words in conclusion.
We are beyond our time. Each of us has cut multiple times because there was just so much that each of us wanted to say. So I've talked with Marlene, and I think she put something in the chat. We would love to continue this dialogue in the November SRS dialogue.